Hey everybody, welcome to week 6. This week we're talking about how to make and what happens when you make educational change and managing educational change. It's a really important topic, obviously, when you think about school reform, because what is reform about? It's about change, and it's about change that has some agenda and some direction, and hopefully it leads to some positive outcome. So what I want to do is I want to just walk you through the content for this week, looking at the Blackboard course page, and we'll go from there. So we're entering into week or phase 2 of the class, which is going to focus on the importance of change and change management in developing, implementing, monitoring, and sustaining educational change, which is another word for school reform. So it's all about change. All right, I've said that like 5 times. But the problem is starting change is often easy. Sustaining and institutionalizing the change is much more difficult. So what we're trying to do is not only understand what the change means, what does it mean to create change in education, but how do we maintain it, how do we manage it, and how do we create sustainability or sustainable change as we do whatever it is that we're doing. So you have a couple of objectives for this week to understand how change occurs in educational organizations, broadly speaking. We certainly can't cover every single way that that happens, but we'll try to talk about what are some of the key factors. We also will be looking at how change is managed. So managing that change is really important, and it can be the difference between a change process that leads to some productive outcome that is sustainable for the long term versus a change process that is resisted and crashes and burns almost immediately after starting. That'll be really important. And then we're going to spend some time talking about the culture of power, what that is, how it affects and influences change. Part of that will also be considering the context in which change occurs, because that's going to be a really important part of the whole system. As we did last week, we have learning modules this week. There are 3 learning modules. I'm not sure why this one is hyperlinked. Oh, it's hyperlinked to the wrong thing. Anyway, the first one is sources and mechanisms of change in educational organization. For this, we're going to rely almost exclusively on Michael Fullen's book called The New Meaning of Educational Change. I've updated here the title of the chapters for the 5th edition. That's the most recent edition. Your syllabus has an older edition listed, so I updated this. This edition is available in the Texas Tech Library if you're local enough to go look there. If not, I will do my best to have a scanned copy available for you linked here as soon as possible. I wanted to point out that the point of the Fullen reading is that change is the result of a whole bunch of different intersecting factors. Michael Fullen has been working in system change at the national level and the provincial level, as well as the district and school level, for decades. Excuse me. He really is one of the leading voices on educational reform in the world. And so listening to him talk about or think about, or reading him thinking about what change is, excuse me, is a really important place for us to start. So you're going to have 2 chapters from him. One on just talking about what does educational change mean, and then his ideas about how do you initiate it, implement it, continue it, things like that. It's a good place to start. Excuse me. I've also put in here a very short 3-minute video by Michael Fullen called Choosing the Right Drivers. This is an older video, but it was created within the time period that he was working on this book, broadly speaking, The New Meaning of Educational Change, because it's in its 5th edition. This book has been around for almost 2 decades already itself. In this video, Fullen himself talks about some of the drivers of educational change and how he sort of defines and perceives how they interact with one another. I think it's really important, again, because he's such a leading voice around school reform, to listen to him. And when you're listening to him, I want you to put on your critical hat and think about, okay, how is this workable? Could what he's describing lead to sustainable systems of change? What kinds of infrastructure, or what kinds of capacity, meaning knowledge and skills, would be necessary among the communities where change was happening, or the organization, the actual school, or the people that are working in that school, in order for these drivers he's talking about to really lead to educational change. So take what you know from the reading and apply it to his brief video and see if it matches up, see if it makes sense, and see if you think it's a workable system. In Module 2, we'll be looking at the role of culture and power in educational change. There are two of your required readings in here. One is from Payne. It's the chapter out of his book, So Much Reform, So Little Change, The Persistence of Failure in Urban Schools. It's the specific chapter talking about liberal and conservative theories of school reform. As we've talked about actually in this class, and you've had in your readings already, educational change is politicized, highly politicized, which is not necessarily what we all want or think there should be, but it's a fact of the matter. And so being aware of how political agendas play into school reform is going to be important for us. I followed this required reading up with you with two sort of sides, a more conservative side and a more liberal side around education. In a previous week, you looked at Rick Hess, and I told you that Rick Hess and the American Enterprise Institute that he represents were very much more on the neoliberal side of things or conservative side of things. In this video on education reform conservative style, Rick Hess just comes out and says it. Here's the conservative education agenda. Now, this video is a few years old, but it's really quite an impressive summary of what the conservative agenda for education actually is. After watching the video, I encourage you to click on this link here and take a few minutes to look over Senator Ted Cruz's website on educational issues and legislation and see if you can notice where the overlap is. Is Ted Cruz sort of matching the conservative education reform agenda that Rick Hess lays out? Are there any ways that it differs? What might be some of the conservative takeaways about what education is or it should be and how it gets there? And then I want you to go to the other side of the aisle and take a look at this video by Beto O'Rourke called Every Texan Deserves Access to a Quality Education. And watch that video. It's an even shorter video. This one's 2 minutes. This one's 1.5 almost. And then after you watch Beto's video, I want you to take a look at O'Rourke's website on education issues and legislation. There's videos on that website as well. And now that you've got sort of both the conservative and the liberal takes on education, and you've read about some of the challenges to that, I want you to start thinking about, are they really that different, first of all? If so, what are the key points that they differ on? And are those points about the purpose, the process, or the outcome? Can you figure out whether liberals and conservatives differ on the purpose, the process, or the outcome? Because I think that if you can identify where the differences are within those three sort of areas, it'll be easier to see whether or not the liberal and conservative agendas really are distinct or whether they're just different versions of the same story. I also want you to read in this section Lisa Delpit's The Silence Dialogue. It's a chapter out of her book, Other People's Children. It's really important. Actually, I think I might have linked to a paper on this, but it's either one, Silence Dialogue, you're good to go. It's a really important reading about how culture is overlapping and intersecting with power. So the culture of power is what she talks about. And politics and culture are part of that culture of power. She's done a really, I think, unique and groundbreaking job identifying how educational change, when it occurs in favor of those racial, linguistic, ethnic, socioeconomic, gender, whatever groups are in control or have dominance, either because of social norms or because of more overt means. If you got some time, you might also click through and just look at this short article interview with Delpit in The Nation. It's just a sort of a question and answer format, and she gives a nice summary of some of her ideas there as well. Finally, for Module 6.3, the role of context in implementing change, I'm going to ask you to read this article from the American Educational Research Journal that looks at exemplary school change efforts within the Kentucky reform. This is an older piece, but what I want you to look for in here is how the cases of school change that are evident in this article, in these cases of school change in Kentucky, are contextualized by the state, by the community, by the school, by the neighborhood, by whatever it is. Really pay attention to anything that you can find that relates to context and the way that context plays into the infrastructure or the capacity or the sustainability potential for that particular educational reform. And then finally, I would like for you to post to the the week 6 discussion board. You've got here. You've got threads to post in again. I would like for you to use the same method that you used in week 5, where you post something in response to the prompts, somebody responds, you respond to them, and they follow up with a final sort of comment about where the discussion went. So you're going to be asked about implementing change in your own work environment and whether or not it worked out the way you expected. Have you seen something like that happen at a school where you worked? Where's the problem, or what's the positive thing? Why is it difficult to plan and implement change based on your own experience? So we're trying to identify what are some of the obstacles to change that might have occurred, and what are some of the unintended or unexpected or surprising outcomes of change that might have occurred. Okay, and that's week 6. Just thinking about educational change and how that's a part of school reform. As always, if you have any questions for me, please let me know. I'm looking forward to seeing you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye.